Okay, so welcome. It looks like I'm here live this is sort of one of my first live streams, I guess. I did muck around with one last year, but didn't really sort of know much about how to do it and things like that. So I can see this one says live. It looks like my camera and speaker are working well. So there we go. So today, what I want to do is firstly just introduce myself. So for those of you who are new to the channel, I haven't met you before. My name's Des Trindle. I'm a 57, very soon to turn 58-year-old triathlete based in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. So my for the last few seasons, I've been back doing triathlons after a little bit of a break, and that's historically been how I've done things. Is my first triathlon was back in the PN in 1983. So seems like a million years ago, and it probably was to a lot of people because a lot of you weren't probably born then. And on and off over those years, I've been in and out of triathlon, depending on what stage of life you're in. And those of you who are a little bit older would know that as you are in your 20s and things like that, young families, you get very busy and you tend to be looking at careers and other things. So sport and fitness can slip away, weight can increase and come back on, and then you have to start that process all over again. But one of the great things I've found about triathlon is that it's always been there. It's always been part of my life, and it's always been a great way for me that when I have put the weight on, and just to give you an idea there, I'm not going to be able to show it in pounds and stuff, and I know a lot of my subscribers are in the US, but I did end up at about 104 kilos back a few years ago when I was training thoroughbred racehorses. And it took nearly 2.5 seasons to get that weight back down to where now I vary between 78 and 80 kilos, depending on what week it is and things like that, and where I'm at in my training cycle. So the idea of doing this live today is that I have been getting a lot of messages from subscribers and even just friends and stuff on Facebook. Is we see you've been doing triathlons for a while. We see you've been coaching a few people. I'm interested in triathlons, and they've been shooting me questions. So what I've been able to do is literally come up with the top 10 questions that I've been asked. And the whole idea of this video today is what I want to do is just walk through each one of those questions just in a conversational type environment, and just try to answer those questions. Now, this being really my first live, I don't expect to see a lot of people on the live, and I don't expect to see a lot in the chat there. So, but if you are around, please feel free to throw any questions that you have up in the chat, and I'll address those as well. I'll sort of keep that to the side so I can see it in the screen. So. But let's kick off. So I guess one of the biggest questions I have is how to actually get started in triathlon. I've seen it grow massively over the years, and I remember it was a bit of a fringe thing when I started doing triathlon. I actually was living in a country town in northern New South Wales, and I was the weird young kid, 13 and 14, that used to ride around in bike in his Lycra and run around and things like that. And not a lot of people did it back then. But now, even yesterday, which was Sunday here in Queensland, Australia, today we're 10 a.m. Monday morning. So, and I'm doing this now because I know it's an evening in the US and it's a Sunday evening. So there might be a few of the subscribers there, but even our Sunday afternoon yesterday, you head down, and I'm in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, which is a Bayside suburb. So you head down to the boardwalk area there, and it's packed. And there's so many people walking, running, biking, and everything like that now. It is really and truly a lifestyle. And I guess that's one of the things that I do love about this sport, is that it doesn't matter how old you are. Like I said, I'm about to turn 58. But I started when I was 13, and it's not uncommon. I go to races and I see guys that are still in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s that are still racing and still actually being quite competitive. There's a gentleman in the 60-year age group here who really, there might be, say, 300-400 in a local Brisbane race, and he'll quite often be, not much out of that top 10 overall. And he's in that 60 to 65 age group. So, and that's quite impressive that that sort of longevity is there within the sport, and it does keep us both physically but also mentally very fit as well. And that's another area that I use the sport very much for, is that mental balance. And I find if I'm not training, I tend to get a little bit down on myself and down about the world. But if I'm training and I have something to focus on, something to look forward to, and that helps a lot in that area. And um, so the first question we're going to touch there is, where do I actually start? And that does sort of lead into that, is that the first thing I would suggest for most beginners is that actually pick an event. I've found it always easier to actually get out and do something and train and to keep moving if I have a goal that I'm working towards. And there's been so many studies on how having a goal can be so much more productive in your life. So, and in my instance, I actually use, and I've got my little phone here, the old iPhone, and I can see that our first race of the season, and it comes up on the front of my phone, and you probably see that there, is the Moreton Bay Triathlon, and it's on September the 27th, and it even tells me it's 34 days away. So when I wake up in the morning and I pick my phone up, that's the first thing I can see, is that I know my race is 34 days away. So if I sometimes get tempted to roll over and go back to sleep, I can go, well, maybe I shouldn't do that, because like everyone, I want to show up doing, feeling okay and knowing that I'm physically giving it everything I can give it and being able to finish that safely. So I guess as far as answering that question goes, one of the first thing I'd say is pick a date, and that gives you that purpose to train. Now, for most beginners, when I'm saying pick a date, pick a race, I'm suggesting that most beginners, I'm seeing a lot of people, and a lot on YouTube especially, where they'll pick an Ironman as the first race. And that's all great if you want to do that, but you don't need to do that. This first race on the 20th of September, and I'm just going to click across to the website here so I can read it, has different distances, and one of the distances that you can actually enter that day is what they call an enticer triathlon. And I'm not going to call it a beginners, because a lot of people race the enticers because they enjoy the speed and the movement of that. Saying speed doesn't mean you have to be quick. This is about participation and about competing. So it's actually a 300-meter swim, a 10K bike ride, and a 2.5K run. Now, the great thing about picking this type of events, it's very safe. It's on a closed course. So it has medical people there and safety people there taking care of us out in the water and on the bike and on the run. So that's why it's, to me, it's one of the great things about the sport, is you can focus, you can pick a race, in this case, 34 days time, and I know that go. Now, that day, there's also a sprint distance, which is the 750 swim, 20K bike, and a 5K run. And that's the distance I'll be kicking my season off with, given this is the first race of the season. And if you look back on my channel, you'll see that back on the 14th of June, I actually competed in the Ironman at Cairns, where I sustained a grade 2 calf tear. So I had a little bit of time off after that, and I'm literally 5 weeks back into a build program again now. So that day, there's also a standard distance. Now, in triathlon, the standard distance, or sometimes also referred to as an Olympic distance, is a 1.5K swim and a 40K bike ride and a 10K run. And a lot of people love to build up to that standard distance, and then they'll jump across to a long distance, so maybe a half Ironman, and then to an Ironman. And I won't cover that in here because we're looking at beginners questions. So when you first kick off, don't worry about speed or anything like that. Just aim to be comfortable in all the three disciplines. Assess where you're at. So if you haven't done anything for a while, and I hadn't when I got back into the sport, and this is going to be my third season, and I was coming off that sort of 100-odd kilo mark. So the first thing I actually did, especially at that age, was I went into my local doctor, and I just had a checkup to start with. I let them know, look, I'm looking at getting back into a sort of fitness program, and I just want to make sure everything's good before I kick that off. So that's going to be my suggestion there, is if you haven't done anything for a while and you are carrying a little bit of weight and things like that, go and see your GP first. get everything checked over, maybe get your bloods done, things like that. Make sure you're right from there. Then start gradually. It's too easy to have all that motivation when you first kick off. Consistency is really the key here, and consistency will always beat the perfect training when you go through there. There's so many resources around now on YouTube. I have a free resources also available on my website, which there's so many there, from heart rate calculators to even free training plans. And you'll find that my website's at trindletrifit.com. So I'll put a link in the description there as well, but you can always drop in there. I do a heap of blogs and I do a heap of free resources as well. So the race itself, the transition and things like that, you'll learn the basics of that. Every race has an event manual as well, so go in that and work through there. But where to actually start? The first thing to start with is, to me, pick a date. So if we summarize that, and get if you haven't done anything for a while, get a doctor check you over, and then we start with our sort of program. So, and sliding into that, which is the next question I generally get asked, is how many questions a week should I train? And this is going to be, and everyone, I hope you got a coffee and just, I'm going to have a sip myself before it gets too cold. And going back to that, how many hours a week really depend on what your goal is and things like that. But you don't need to be training sort of 10 to 15 to 20 hours per week. And you'll see some of that on YouTube, especially for people that are heading into Ironman. It's nothing for someone on an Ironman to do 20-hour weeks. But for most beginners, I'd say around 5 to 7 hours per week would be absolutely plenty. But start, once again, where your current fitness and lifestyle is and what you can sustain. So when I'm doing my own program, I always do my program around my work and my family. Or it should be the other way around, really. Your family's first and then your work and all your business commitments. And then I look at where I can fit my sessions in during the week. So 3 disciplines also doesn't mean you have to do huge volume. So in the early days, one of the mistakes that we made, there wasn't a lot of information for us. So we always thought we should train like a swimmer, train like a cyclist, and train like a runner. So every day we were jumping in the pool. We were trying to squeeze a bike ride in somewhere, and then we were trying to squeeze a run in, around 40 hours of work as a younger kid as well. And we were wondering why we were getting injured and worked out. It isn't like that. And what I suggest for most beginners is, look, 2 swims per week, 2 bikes per week, 2 runs per week. And if you can combine somewhere in there just 2 sort of stretching core sessions, and once again, YouTube's your best friend for that. And I even do that myself. I go in and look at a YouTube video on core strength exercises for 30 minutes, and then I will follow that. And I will do that a few times a week as well. Combining a session can be great too, and it can also save a lot of time. You could do a swim and then jump on the bike. You could do a bike and then just jump on a small run, and you can get those 2 sessions in. I always like to have 1 day off a week, but I'll go a bit more into how we structure our training week in the next question. So also, one of the things I say that's really important is don't build your volume up too quick. So if you haven't been running, don't go out and smash out a 10K run. Also, I'm going to say there, for most beginners, I suggest that one of the first things they do is purchase themselves a cheap heart rate monitor and look at his heart rate zone calculator. And I'd like to see a lot of your training, even 100% of your training when you first kicked off in that zone too. And that can mean a hell of a lot of walking rather than running and things like that. Might be short runs between light posts and then a lot of walking until your heart rate comes down and a short run again. And believe me, I started that way. And even on the bike, initially, I remember doing an 8K bike ride and then sitting out the front in the driveway, leaning against the garage door, thinking, how the hell am I supposed to do 20K, let alone going and doing 100K and 180K in an Ironman? How should I structure my training week? And what I'm going to say there is what I said earlier, is look around what your family and your work commitments are, and then structure your training. And remember, I said it's just 2 bikes to kick off with, 2 swims and 2 runs. So if I give you a beginner or something, looking at what a beginner's week would be, Monday might be a rest mobility day. So in my case, today it's Monday here in Australia, and I've got a rest day from training. But saying that, this afternoon I'll do a 30-minute stretching and then a core strength session as well, just because I like to keep a little bit of movement, and that's also recovery for me as well. On a Tuesday, you might go and have a bike ride. On a Wednesday, a swim, maybe an easy run as well. Thursday, excuse me, could be another bike ride. Friday could be a swim. And then the weekend, people generally, if they're working, have a little bit more time. So you might do a little bit of a longer bike ride and then a very short, what we call a brick run, which is a run off the bike. And then Sunday, maybe an easy or an endurance run. But that could be a typical beginner's weekly structure for me. Also, with those things, you don't need to be smashing the sessions. Like I said earlier, just go out, spend a few dollars on a heart rate monitor. If you've got an Apple phone these days, most of the Apple Watch these days, most of those will even show your heart rate. Do a little bit of research or go onto our resource page and have a look at your heart rate zones, and keep at least a minimum of 80% of that training in that zone 2. And you'll understand a bit about more zone 2 just by doing a simple Google on zone 2 training, or once again, heading to our resource pages. Okay, next question, which is going to be question 4, is, do I need an expensive triathlon bike? And I'm going to say there, absolutely not. Now, here, things like Facebook Marketplace are going to be your best friend if you don't want to go out and spend 10 or 15 grand on a bike, which is not unusual these days. And to be honest, even to start with, a lot of us have got an old mountain bike and something like that in the garage. When I first got back into this a few years ago, and like I said, I was training racehorses for about nearly about 7 years there, where I didn't really do much. What I did then was I went onto Facebook Marketplace and I bought myself a cheap, quite a few year old basic felt road bike with the Shimano 105 components, and it cost me all of $500. And I did all of my training for the next nearly 12 months on that bike with a cheap set of clip-on aero handlebars. Even now, last season, I raced 12 races in total, I think it was. And so I can't remember, I think there were 7 or 8 races in that with the Queensland Triathlon Series, which is the QTS series here in Brisbane. And I podiumed every single one of those in my age group, which is a 55 to 59. I think I won 1 or 2 of them. And I picked my bike up off Facebook Marketplace, which is a triathlon specific time trial type bike, for all of $1,500 with a nice set of wheels on it. So you don't need to spend an absolute fortune to be able to get kicked off in this sport. It's not unusual, and you'll see a lot of people at the local races going around on the mountain bikes that they've just dragged out of the garage. And to me, that's awesome, because the last thing I ever want to see this sport is people thinking that they need to spend, upwards of $10,000 on a bike just to go out there and participate. One thing I will say with the bike is, do make sure it fits. Now, there's a few things you can do there. You can go to your local bike shop. You should be getting it serviced anyway to make sure the tyres are in good condition, the brakes are working, and they can also, any reputable bike shop will also look at whether that bike fits you correctly, so you're not doing any sort of damage to yourself. Now, this is a big one, is how do I prepare for open water swimming? A lot of triathlons are in open water swimming. So the one coming up here in September, the first race of the season off, is going to be a bay swim. So it's in the local Brisbane Bay, and it's at Clontarf there and next to the bridge. So it's open water. It does get a little bit choppy, but there's no waves or anything like that. And look, even now, after many years of swimming, last season I had 2 panic attacks in the swim, because Think about it, you are swimming with groups of people. Sometimes they're barging into you, sometimes they're swimming over you. Everyone tries to be respectful and safe, but it does happen. And you've got to be able to learn how to relax. So, what I'm going to say is firstly, start your training off at your local swimming pool. Make sure you're comfortable swimming the distance of whatever the race is. So, if you're doing a 300-meter race, learn and be comfortable swimming 300 meters continually. Now, does that need to be freestyle? No, it doesn't. You can swim at how you're comfortable. Freestyle will be the quickest stroke. But if you need to, do breaststroke to take a break every now and again, do that. If you're nervous, start at the back of the wave, don't of the starting position when you're going into a race. Don't start at the front in the center. If you're a slower swimmer, you will get swum over. And don't start off too fast when you're kicking off your race. I see that a lot. People will swim to the first marker buoy flat out and then be out of breath, and then it can cause all sorts of things. I've had instances where like I said, last season, I had two little panic attacks in the swim, and I don't really know why. And I even rolled onto my back and just floated for, I think once was about 30 seconds until I got myself calmed down and got my breath back. But even saying that, while I was doing that, there were paddle boarders coming over to make sure I was okay. And if you do need to, throw your hand up in the air and they'll be there really, really quickly. So. But the main thing there is just to learn to relax, control your breathing. And that's what I found with myself. I was getting a bit too tense. For me, I was swimming at the front and in the center. I do swim sort of okay and quite quickly, and I normally am at the front or leading my age group out. So, but there are times, like I said, where I'll panic as well. So, if you haven't swum for a while, it doesn't hurt also in your local area to look up whether there's a master swim squad or a master, or even someone who does a little bit of swim coaching, and go have a swim, have them look at your stroke. And I remember here going back 2 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I used to thrash the water a little bit. And to give you an example, I was swimming about 28 minutes for 1.5K swim. I went and I joined up with a local master swimming squad up at Maroochydore there at Cotton Tree. And there was a lovely lady who at that time was in her 70s who taught or who took the squad. And the first thing she got me to do was relax, concentrate on my breathing, slow my stroke down, look at where I'm placing my hands in the water, all that sort of stuff that they do. Very quickly, without even gaining more fitness, I was picking up minutes in the swim to the point where I was swimming, I think, Noosa that year, which was a 1.5K swim. And it's hard to sort of quantify, but I was swimming around that 19-minute mark at the back of the faster swim packs. So, and that was not fitness, that was purely just getting someone who is very good on the technical side of swimming and the stroke and getting them to have a look at you in the water. So preparing for open water swimming, that's covered that one off. So now, how hard should I be training? And this one is really a great question, because the most common mistake I see a lot of beginners make is that they train too hard. They eventually burn themselves out, or they get injured or get sick. And that is going back to what I said earlier, with one of the best investments you can have is if you've got an Apple Watch, you've got your heart rate there. If you haven't, get yourself a heart rate monitor. Garmin do a heap, Polar do a heap. You'll find them on Facebook Marketplace for not a lot of dollars these days. When I first got back into it, I think I spent about $60 on a basic heart rate monitor. It didn't really record anything, just showed me what my heart rate was. And then I trained nearly 100% of the time for those first 8 to 12 weeks, purely just in that zone 2. And that did involve, especially with the running, because I was carrying so much weight, that did involve a lot of just stopping and walking until my heart rate come back into that zone and then going again. And to calculate those zones, I'll say again, you can Google calculate your heart rate zones, and a lot of calculators will come up, or you can head across to our website, which is on that trend, or trifit.com. And there you'll find a nice free calculator that you can throw everything in, and it'll give you your heart rate zones for zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So another thing I see a lot of people make is they start training, or mistake I see a lot of people make is they start training with their friends and they turn every training session into a race. Now, training with friends and training with the squad is great, and it does take a lot of discipline there to slow yourself down and say, hey, I'm not at that level. I want to do this specific session that day. So don't go out. And we used to do this as kids as well when we were younger. You'd go out and you'd do a 1 hour ride or in the afternoon, and you'd try to beat your time every single time. You'd actually end up digging a little bit of a hole for yourself. So my main thing there is consistency is going to be your best friend, and be very smart about the training, and recovery is actually where we get fit. So if you've got an easy day, make sure it is an easy day. Question 7, what is a brick session and do I need them? Now, a brick session is just a run off the bike, and it doesn't have to be long. I'm just going to have another little sip of coffee here. Now, I have a brick session on Thursday this week. So my brick session will be, and I've actually got a little bit of a bike interval, so I'm doing an indoor session on Thursday. So I'll do an indoor bike, and then I'm actually just planning on doing a 10-minute run off the bike by feel. So I'm just going to run where I'm comfortable, and I'm at a conversational pace. So it's perceived effort, and I'm not going to run too fast. And why we do those brick sessions is when you first run off the bike, it'll feel like your legs have turned to rubber. So what they do is they just, it's that adaptation, and it's getting you used to that. And really, I would only do 1 brick session a week, and I would include that as one of my weekly runs. Do I need strength and mobility training is another question. And look, this is not going to the gym and creating more soreness and more fatigue. This is about more stretching core and help support the muscles that will help the supporting muscles that are involved in that repetitive work. Swimming, biking, and running is something that just over and over again. And what we find is that our core stability can help that as far as our posture and our control goes. So I'm going to say, yes, you do definitely need it, but it doesn't need to dominate your program. It could be 2 sessions a week. In my case, it's 3 sessions a week because I'm correcting a little bit of an issue that I have in hip alignment, which has caused that calf tear. But it's very valuable. Flexibility also, cycling in particular does, tighten up that hip area. And if you can sort of open that up a little bit more, you'll find you'll run a bit and also reduce your injury as well. So once again, you don't need to do a lot of that. 2 to 3 times a week, no more than 20 to 30 minutes a session. And when you're doing these, don't do them to create fatigue. Do them so you're feeling good at the end of them. Another question 9, so we're getting close to the end of our 10 questions, is what equipment do I really need as a beginner? And realistically, I'd say keep this very short. So you're going to obviously need a swim suit or a tri-suit. So you can pick up, I like the tri-suits because I can do everything in them during the race. I don't need to be throwing on a shirt or anything like that. You'll know that on the bike and the run that you need to have your upper body covered as part of the rules anyway. So a tri-suit covers that. For training, I just have a set of swimmers. I wear sort of like a longer short swimmers, not shorts themselves, but they're almost like a bike short without a chamois in them when I swim. A set of goggles for swimming. If you don't have a set of goggles, you can pick them up at the local sports store, or even most swimming pools, you can buy them behind the counter when you check in. Uh, a wetsuit if it's required and appropriate for the event. In Queensland, we don't get to use a wetsuit a lot. The race on the 27th will be a wetsuit swim, so I'll have one for that. And that will probably be it for the wetsuits for the season until we come around to the last race of the season in May. So I wouldn't worry about a wetsuit initially, and especially if you're just going to do a 300-meter swim. If you are in a colder environment, then yes, you might have to look at a wetsuit. And once again, you don't have to buy these things new. Saying that, wetsuits can be a little tricky as far as the fitting goes because you don't want them to be loose, and also you don't want them to be too tight where they're restricting your movement or your breathing. You'll need a safe working bike. So, don't have to go out and spend a fortune on that. We've already spoken about that, but make sure it is serviceable. Make sure the gears are working, make sure the brakes are working, make sure it does fit you. You do need an approved cycle helmet. I wouldn't ride without a helmet. I had one ride in Europe where I didn't wear a helmet, and I wore it for every other ride after that. I've seen too many people, and even myself, one of the worst crashes I had was a low speed crash up a hill where I fell straight onto my head. And if I didn't have the helmet, which was absolutely destroyed in that, I'm pretty sure I probably wouldn't be here talking to you now. So running shoes, obviously, is another thing that we need. Socks. In the shorter races, a lot of people don't wear socks, and what they'll do in their running shoes is they'll put like an elastic laces in those, and you can look at those as well. I don't wear socks anything up to about up 10k, and anything over 10k, I tend to put socks on because my feet get a bit sore. You can need a basic sports water bottle and sort of basic nutrition. So I always carry a water bottle if I'm out on the bike and if I'm running for more than 30 minutes. And even my 30-minute recovery runs lately, I've been carrying a little water bottle, which is in a belt strap. In those, I just use a basic sugar water mix with a little bit of cordial. So, but you can buy Gatorade, you can buy all different type of sports drinks these days. So, and once again, that's something to discuss and to Google later is race nutrition. Towel, obviously, and sunscreen. So things you don't need initially. Obviously, you don't need a $10,000, $15,000 bike like we've spoken about. You don't need flash carbon disc wheels and things like that. Your power meters, your carbon plated shoes for running, expensive aero helmets, and all these other gadgets. They come over time, and some people don't even bother with them. So I do remember getting past at the 2005 World Championships, and I had at that time the top of the range bike, at the top of the range everything. I had some German guy come past me on a second-hand road bike, not even a triathlon bike, like I was standing still. And it wasn't the most state-of-the-art thing, so you don't actually need that. The main thing is that the equipment you do have is serviceable, safe, and more importantly, comfortable. Okay, we're on to our final question. This has sort of dragged on a little bit. We're around the half an hour mark. So, what are the biggest mistakes that I see triathletes make or new triathletes make? And I'm going to say the first one is doing too much too soon and turning every training session into a race and making it too hard. So, comparing yourself against other people is a big one, and I've spoken about that before. And myself in the younger days, I used to compare myself against other people, where these days I tend to just compare myself against myself and try to improve and make myself better in every event that I do. Buying expensive equipment before developing their fitness, you can end up with a lot of equipment that, one, you don't need, and two, that doesn't really suit you either. So just be wary of that one. Neglecting your weakest discipline. And this used to be one of my things. I didn't like running too much. So if there was ever a session I was going to skip that week, it was my run. And I used to always say I could be world champion if it was just swim bike. These days, I focus a bit more on my running, and that doesn't mean I run hard all the time. I'm a lot smarter with the way I do structure my training. And last season, at a lot of the races, if I wasn't the quickest run off the bike, I was the second quickest. Avoiding open water practice in the swimming, that is something that, yeah, look, I'm going to say you have to be conscious about your safety there as well with open water swimming. Look at where you are swimming, look at the environment you're swimming in, and whether you have the appropriate safety things there. But sometimes it's wiser not to swim open water, go to your local pool where it's safe. Saying that, sometimes you can find a group that are doing a swim open water and you can join in with them, and then that's the ideal preparation. Or you can find a area that might have patrolled beaches and stuff where it's safe and you see other people open water swimming. There's also some great flotation devices that you can attach with the little belt things these days and drag behind you as well, which I think are a great idea as far as visibility goes. So uh, trying new nutrition on race day, that would be another one that I've seen and I've even done myself. As someone, you'll go and you'll pick up your race pack for the race and there'll be a gel in there that they've given you from one of the sponsors. You've never tried it before, but you throw it out there and you take it while you're racing and it upsets your stomach or something like that. So always practice what you're going to do on race day in training as far as nutrition and everything goes like that. I see a lot of people that don't practice the bike to run and then get wobbly legs. And we've already spoken about starting to swim too hard and things like that. But they're the main things I see in beginners. And look, even pros still make mistakes in race. I was only watching one of the T100s the other day on television there on YouTube, and I think it was live feed, where one of the top pros in the world overshot the dismount line. And I saw another one, and I wasn't sure if it was the same race or one of the Ironmans. One of the female pros came in on the bike, ran down the wrong bike racking, and then had to run all the way back. You know, even the pros make mistakes. So nothing's going to be perfect. There are two races last year where I did exactly the same thing. I came off the bike, went in, racked my bike, looked down, and I'd overrun where my shoes are by about 6 or 7, maybe more spots, and had to pick my bike up and then run back again. I've run in and stood there like an absolute goose because I couldn't remember where I put my running shoes. So mistakes happen, they do that, and you can mitigate those mistakes by planning and thinking about what you're doing each time. But look, I'm going to come to the end of this now, and your first triathlon isn't about producing the most perfect performance. It's about just getting yourself healthy, about learning, and about getting to that start line and just enjoying the experience. And I've had over the years, I've trained a lot of people, even right through to Ironman, where in Ironman, they get so focused on things. And I always say to them, there is never that experience again. Enjoy the journey and don't rush down that finish line. Enjoy it. Thank the families, high five the crowd. You put a lot of work and effort into getting yourself to that point from wherever you were. Make sure you're there to enjoy it. Anyway, so if you've made it this far in this first live, you've done very, very well, because I have rambled on a little bit. I'd like to thank you for that. If you have subscribed to my channel, once again, thank you. I really do appreciate it. I don't produce YouTube videos for any sort of monetary gains. I produce them purely to give back to a sport that's been there my whole life now and has got me through some good and some very bad times. If you're after any free resources, once again, you'll see that that's on my page, and that's at trindletrifit.com, and it's TRINDLLTRIFIT.com, and feel free to go and download those. It will ask for your email address. All I ever do with those email addresses is just notify you when we put another blog up, so you don't get anything more than that. And once again, it's free. Everything's free on that site for you to grab. So until next time, guys, I just want you to be safe out there. If you're looking at doing your first triathlon shortly, enjoy. And until next time, see you later.